So I've got a essay here that I think is going to tie a lot of things together at an even deeper level and plane. The title here is Joe McGinnity, Mud, Flesh, Machine. And this is going to be the philosophical mechanics of industrial modernity and the deadball era, and the early American connection and relationship to the Hindu Vedantic tradition. This is primarily about a vision of the body and the field at large as in a unified field. So we've already gone very, very, very deep into a cosmologically and psychologically unified field theory, which has substantial high-level vanguard scientific, philosophical, and world historical backing across civilizations and timescales, and we've discussed this. What I'm talking about here kind of ushers back and gestures back to the Hegelian project, which we were pursuing in baseball history and culture, and visualizing through baseball history and culture, which is to say the vision of the body and the field is changing over time in relationship to emerging forms of consciousness as technology. So we're talking here about the effects of emerging industrial consciousness in the West actually terraforming the human psyche, and that history itself is a field at work with the psychic field proper, which is to say the quantum mechanical field in a grand cosmological sense, but also the intimate psychological field of civilizations, cultures, communities, and individuals. So this goes into ancestral trauma, right? Epigenetics, the concept of the technology of the human body as a genetic formula, which is being transmuted over time by interrelationship and relative interaction within the larger quantum field, which is being ritualized in a phenomenological sense as space-time. So what I'm talking about here, it does really so much help to have this visual aid, which is the Joe McGinnity press cabinet photograph, which I'm depicting here, because I'm going to ground this in the emergence of modern technology in the form of early American industrial modernism as a field of being, right? And so modernism is conventionally discussed as a literary phenomenon or even a visual arts phenomenon, but I'm suggesting it's a consciousness phenomenon. So this example, which is so profound here, is articulating a field of the body. So when you look at the appearance of this formula, particularly the intersection of the Victorian cabinet photograph, which is being actively repurposed at the turn of the century for modern photojournalism and mass media, we are looking at a transmutation of the way that the body is conceived of in space-time and transmitted. This returns us to losslessness and the lossy file, because we're talking about image variations and image transformations as in translations. So this is all a way of interpreting and articulating and projecting and representing the body in space and in time in a cultural sense, which is also in a grand scale a consciousness sense. So as you can see here in this cabinet photograph, we're looking at the process of news media editing, which is isolating the figure or the subject in space with the white space that has surgically removed the form from its background and thus isolated the individual or the subject, which is the fundamental consciousness characteristic of modernity, which is a total subjectification as in a form of analysis and evaluation of the human subject body removed from space-time as an artifact of space-time. This is an inquiry into the human being. This is what we see with Virginia Woolf. This is what we see with T.S. Eliot. We're looking into the human being as a form of historical materialism, as an experience, a direct, unmediated experience, which itself is the foundational ground of the Vedantic inquiry into who am I? Who is the I? This is stripping away the sheaths of perception, which is to say the body or the mind, the voices of the mind, the culture, the biome of the human body and its ancestral history and its ancestral technology as a form and formation, into the direct field of awareness as a form of direct perception, experiential perception, as articulated by sages and mystics like Abhinavagupta, who are really just fundamentally talking about the experience of the quantum mechanical in and as the human body directly, subjectively. So I'm going to continue here. This form of isolating the figure just purely, right, because this is grounded in history. This is grounded in cultural history, material history, and the emergence of technology. This is not an aesthetic statement as much as it is a functional statement. Much of human history is informed entirely by functionality, with the rare exception of the aesthetic device, which we've gone into. The white space around the subject here, Joe McGinnity, is to extract the image for printing purposes, which is then replicated in production of mass media. And the reason to extract the image with white space is it makes the translation of the subject into the new form, into the complexified form of multiple images constellated on the newsprint page along with text, easier. The process of that translation becomes easier. But again, what is lost is a continual isolation of the subject and subjectivity. Again, this is coded into modernity. This is the essential, fundamental, metaphysical, even esoteric characteristic of modernity, which is then populating the entire phenomenological field and experience of modernity proper. This is a lossy, again, into losslessness, lossy coding of the body into the image file, which is representational. And what's characteristic of modernity is the extension and extensions of symbolic chains of information, as in technology. All technologies are prosthetics of the human experience, including the body, including the continual prosthetic addition to the mind, the brain, the forebrain, the hindbrain, and its components, which are continually evolving, complexifying, and articulating. This is the lossy coding of the body into the image file, which is being here projected, right? This is not an illustration. This is the chemical light print of a photograph being isolated from its field with the white space, which is isolating the subject of Joe McGinnity, and then being edited again. This is then being transformed further, again, beyond the photograph, beyond the photographic editing, which is the isolation, into newsprint, which is again compressing and condensing the image into a further simplification, a further distillation. And this distillation is into a dimensional collapse of form to reveal void, which is, again, a cosmological principle, as we've talked about in terms of whole dynamics. We're replicating these essential metaphysical cosmological principles in the human experience, in culture, progressively through time and through history, through the development, particularly hyper-accelerated in modernity, through the development of industrial technology. Specifically, in this case, industrial media technology as a way and form of image representation. The representation of the image is the cultural artifact of the articulation of a status of consciousness. And this is most easily visualized in the evolution of a master painter like Picasso or Rembrandt. The change over time is the change in the articulation and thus the transformation and transmutation of the field of consciousness, which is projecting the image into space and into time. This is the phenomenological unity of cosmos and psyche. If you understand this, because the psyche itself is the entire cosmological field, fundamentally, first and foremost, pre-phenomenologically. So when we're talking about this lossy translation, this is a technology, this industrial news media technology, which is bursting into view at the very turn of the 1900s, is an esoteric interrogation into the body consciousness, absolutely. Again, as we discussed, as in the Vedantic sheaths of consciousness, as they pertain to phenomenological appearance of form. This is stripping away the apparent, as Blake would say, printing with the infernal method, with technologies that are salutary and medicinal to melt away the appearance of things to grasp the hidden essence. And this is the Vedantic scientific method of stripping away the forms of body, mind, culture to perceive who am I, what am I fundamentally. This is to reach a real experiential, existential understanding of the field of consciousness itself proper, beyond the appearance of separation as in the development and acculturation and cultivation of the organism. as a pseudo-private entity, as a field of sensate experience and a vision of being, which itself is necessarily, again, as Blake says, closed off, as in perceiving through chinks in the cavern. This is the spiritual principle also articulated by Einstein when he discusses the delusion that the human being is somehow separated or cut off from the larger cosmological, and that this spiritual principle, or the work that's even present and manifest in science, is a return and a real understanding of that holistic nature. That's a paraphrase. So consciousness, and this is what's so profound here, especially with this turn of the century cabinet photo, which is actively being transformed and transforming into a mass media device. The cabinet photo, in a Victorian sense, was a private documentary artifact, usually ancestral or familial or within a small community or small group. The cabinet photo here is being used as a board to instigate and withdraw and draw out the image into a mass media form, which is the newsprint and photojournalistic technology of the turn of the century modernity. So we're looking at consciousness itself. Again, draw this back to psychic transformation at a mass scale, right? History itself is a mass psychic transformation over time, and the acceleration and hyperacceleration that modernity produces in the emergence of industrial technologies, which terraform and reconfigure that field of consciousness. Technology is always already a prosthetic which changes the field of awareness. And again, you can look at Galileo and Copernicus as examples of this. Astronomy itself transfiguring the cosmological awareness and thus changing the way that the human being perceived itself. Consciousness as a historically aesthetic principle of emergence of new realities. What I mean by historically aesthetic is that it is manifest in the appearance of history as the phenomenological object. That phenomenological object is a totem of the status of consciousness itself. It is projecting the status of consciousness itself from which it is emerging and embodying actively. This is the power of historical artifacts. It's the secret, kind of sacral, hidden sense. The soul of a cultural artifact is its status of consciousness from which and from when it emerged. Imbued, as John Milton would say, with the fifth essence. And when he says fifth essence, he means soul. And he discusses this in terms of the artifact of the book. That the book is imbued with the soul of the author. The one who creates it. And this is precisely what we're talking about in terms of cosmological, the grand cosmological phenomenology of all life and all of existence. That which appears to be is imbued with the status of consciousness, the transcendental figuration of consciousness, which is to say the a priori psychic condition of that which is creating it. And this is the way that we shift the way that we think about humanity via consciousness, via awareness, which is the mirror which changes perception. And this is articulated in the hypermodern sense with AI or personal digital technology, whether that's computers or handheld touchscreen cell phones. So, and I want to connect this here, and there's this radical connection here, because when we're talking about this entire field, we're talking ultimately and fundamentally about the physical body as the primary technology of the human being. So this gets me into Gabor Mate, who I'm bringing up again, in the connection between emotions, psychology, psyche, and the physical body, as in the experience of the individual. Again, experiential process being primary, and that experience itself is that which is actively changing the physical body. And this is the foundation of epigenetics. This is profoundly widely studied and understood, and I'm just expanding this to a grand historical, deep time, deep space, glacial cosmological context when I'm saying consciousness is fundamentally the template for the form. That consciousness itself, if we were going to talk about a grand cosmological mind, as in the field itself, the psychic field, as primary to the phenomenological appearance of things, which is always temporal, which is always being altered actively through space-time relative interaction, which is changing conditions of form this, you could say, grand cosmic mind or the psyche itself, through revelation and awareness of that which it is, which is a process of distillation, obfuscation, and revelation through technologies it creates, which mirrors itself back to itself. This is the idea of technology as networks of information, which are recreating the fundamental synaptic and neurological condition of human beings, as well as the interstellar relationships of solar systems and galaxies. These are networks of information which are self-replicating, self-reproducing at different levels of cognition in terms of a scalar phenomenon. Again, scalar being cosmos and psyche. So this revelation, this is an awareness of awareness itself, the deeper prelapsarian, pre-material understanding of the true forces at work, the primary forces and form of psyche itself. And this is why you have mystics like Abhinavagupta articulating the direct experience of the quantum field or the unified field hundreds and thousands of years ago. But you have the scientific, in terms of the scientific method, development of the awareness of the quantum field working backwards through the opacity of physical experience, working backwards through the opacity of the physical body, such as Da Vinci's work on the anatomy, or Copernicus and Galileo's work on the cosmos, and into Newton, right, who works off of Kepler as a base and foundation, who again is a cosmologist, working back through Newton and Newton's real project, which is an esoteric awareness of that which is itself. Newton is attempting to penetrate into phenomenology using such fields as even alchemy to understand the real relationship of the cosmos and the real way that consciousness transforms. And the Newtonian project is, interestingly enough, perhaps most inherited in the coming century with and by Hegel, in terms of how we're talking about the spirit of the age and the transformation over time, which is visualized phenomenologically through the grand cultural artifact of the cosmos itself, which is really just a change of status of consciousness and time in terms of an impending emerging revelation through the technology of the cosmos as itself perceiving itself. So we're looking here at the Industrial Revolution in relationship to this pseudo cabinet photo, which is really a origin object for mass image media production in terms of news media photography. The Industrial Revolution and the vision of the body, this transformation that occurs in this specific grounded historical material moment in time, and the media consciousness, which is imbued in this object because it has a very specific aesthetic field. It has a very specific aesthetic presence, and it's communicating and articulating something profoundly revolutionary. It's actively changing clothes. It's no longer a cabinet photo, and it's not yet a mass newsprint media device, which we come to know just specifically as the press photograph with its typical newsprint taglines on the back of the object, and often just itself just on the newsprint, or itself on the photographic printing paper. It's not backed by a cabinet photo, and progressively becomes less and less marked up by news editors. So this media consciousness that's imbued in objects, again, to return to John Milton and the idea of the fifth essence, is a real profound object theory of the signature of a larger cosmosynaptic unfolding of consciousness. And we're articulating this and locating this in a very specific cultural moment. But what I'm suggesting here and articulating here and saying is that that larger cosmological unfolding itself phenomenologically is just a mass cultural trace of the technological transformation of psyche in and through the field of space-time as a phenomenological emergence, as a formal emergence. It's an alphabet, as in a symbolic register, which is articulating beneath the appearance of the symbol as an aesthetic and as a waveform, right? A quantum waveform sound, articulating a status of consciousness itself. This is the primary field. It's pulling the object back through the primary field. And when you encounter an object like this McGinnity cabinet mass media photograph, you're looking at a paradigm shift in real time, which is articulating a strange revelation in the sense that it's so particular. You pull this out of history, in the field of history, it's between revolutionary worlds, it's between paradigms, and as such is a clarified, high contrast, chiaroscuric object, which is articulating this process of transformation, just as we would discuss in the ages of revolutions themselves, whether it's the Haitian or the French or the American. We're looking at a paradigm shift through this hyper-exaggerated phenomenology of war, we could say, just as much as we could say as of the revelation of Picasso's turn towards his specific articulation of Cubism. We're looking at these revolutions in perception, which are then embodied in the field of being phenomenologically through an event, as in the Revolutionary War in America, or the event of the painting, as in Picasso's Guernica, right? So these are all hyper-located in an anthropological sense in the field of the human being in terms of modern and early modern culture, but we're talking about a larger phenomenon, right? This is a larger grand cosmological principle, which is manifesting through the body in and upon reflection, in and upon the body, as in praxis, or a way of being in space-time, as in ultimately a philosophy of athletics in a pure aesthetic sense, which is moving through space-time with increasing presence of articulation, which is to say, in many ways, the philosophical idea or concept of grace, as in an interrelationship with the grand cosmological whole, synthesis and symphony, and a real apprehension and apperception of that in terms of embodiment. This is an embodied practice. Again, right, this returns us to the existential field of the perception of awareness itself. And thus an articulation through the cultural object of the human being itself as a technology of this grand cosmological psychological unity, and as such an embodiment and practice of that field of being, as in the real articulated conscious revelation of understanding. And this is always already athletic because it always already is movement based. We're talking about just as much in athletics of the mind as in athletics of the body. It's a total field principle. It's holistic. And this returns us deeply to the principles of the Tao and the Vedanta, which are, again, our articulations of the quantum field through the experiential register of the mystic or the sage. So there's a profound unity here, and what I'm trying to get to in many ways is that the use of Joe McGinnity here in this specific object is so incredibly important. It's almost transcendental or synchronistic in terms of McGinnity being a transient coal field worker and laborer who experiences profound tragedies in these early coal fields, as an industrial laborer. Again, a lot of this early modern American baseball, a lot of the most profound and influential figures are born from the coal mines and the factories of early modern industrial America. And so what I'm suggesting here is this is radically changing the way that the human being relates to the body, conceptualizes the body, and this is particularly present and particularly important in the sense of this change that occurs with early 20th century industrial values, which are a reflection of the emergent technologies, which are radically shifting and changing and reconfiguring the way that the human being relates to itself, the body, by way of consciousness revelation, drawing consciousness out into different possibilities technologically, as in the appearance in space and the way that the body is practiced ritualistically in time, which is to say the everyday. This is just as much artificial intelligence and computational devices as it is the invention of coal fields and coal mines to power this industrial supercenter of we'll say, eastern seaboard America at the turn of the century and springing up these massive industrial metropolises such as New York City. We're talking about the change of the revelation of the body as is articulated in Marx most profoundly in his Grundrisse, when he says that the man becomes the machine. There's a form of profound love in the sense that the body becomes the tool or the mechanism or the instrument, and the will, the thermodynamic will, as in the passion of the body, which is metabolic, which is also thermonuclear in a grand radiation sense in terms of the star that powers it in terms of the solar system. That will itself becomes an engine of the machine and the mechanism which becomes the man. And this is precisely what Marx articulates in his critique of early industrialism, right? And early industrialization in terms of the creation of these tools which radically change the way that being is produced as a mode of experience, just as much as it changes the way that labor itself produces cultural objects, artifacts, and civilization itself as a product of sculpting, building, whether that's brickwork, whether that's the light bulb, whether that's the aqueduct, right? Because this is an active terraforming of the field of being that is experiencing itself locally through this environmental network of different technologies, such as a Gothic cathedral, which is really an aesthetic revelation of being and a participation in this increasingly complexifying, supermodifying realm of being, which is to say all of the different technologies which are emerging through the human being, which is itself a primary technology of the cosmos, as in a genetic, chemical, and elemental and thermonuclear construction of a form. Itself a linguistic, a letter, a language, a speech, a vowel, and a symbol. So we're looking there at this process of terraforming the psyche via the real, right, again, this is supra-body, the real consciousness, which is the entire field of being, which is the grand psyche or the grand psychological, which you could also just say is the cosmological, the unified field of being. And this is a historical becoming of consciousness, which here we're locating in early modern industrial America through this turn toward the mass news media image and this moment at which the photographic form is torn asunder from a private media object into a mass-produced media object, and the way that actually changes the way the photograph formally manifests in space and time. Just the same as we look at Picasso, and it's very different from the era of the divine right of kings or the patronhood of the former portrait masters prior to this revolutionary modern industrial mechanical turn, which is a profound shift in the architecture of being, which is then manifesting itself aesthetically and phenomenologically in the field of direct perception and the way that the body is and the human being and the mind is relating to that field. So this is a historical becoming consciousness and a historical becoming conscious of the terrain reflected in the documents of the images, which refract the emergent techno-industrial body consciousness as an increasing revelation of pure mind, as in the quantum physical and the Vedantic. It's refracting this total pure revelation back to us in stages, because this technology is in stages stripping back, like a paint thinner, stripping back the phenomenological apparent into increasing revelations of techno-digital proficiency, which itself is a high abstraction. It's a pulling out of consciousness over and out of this field of density. And what these images, these industrial modern images, are progressively doing is lightening the form. They're, again, as we discussed in terms of the lossy file, through this turn in the Victorian era into the newsprint form of the photograph, it is a progressive translation into decreasing densities, a pure articulation of the absolute symbolic status of that which is, and then finally a ripping away of the symbolic status into an utter imagelessness, which again in the Vedantic sense is the void, or in the Tao is itself the Tao, the grand field of being itself, and a total pure articulation of the singularity, which is suggested to us by Hegel as the end of history. And the end of history is just the articulation of being, which is itself the abolition of time to reveal the formless eternal. Again, a retrieval of the pure absolute technological instrument of being itself proper. So this is prior to technology, and technology itself being the symbolic order, the symbolic steps of articulation, which itself are an increasing complexification unto the revelation of being itself. And this is articulated most clearly in the appearance of the human form, the appearance of the genetic human form as a spelling. It's a threaded spelling. That's what the gene is, the genome. So, again, psyche in the pure form as a priori to the cosmos and to cosmos, in the sense that cosmos is the phenomenological form. And psyche is the quantum mechanical force and force field, and beyond force, presence. This presence that is beyond matter, which itself is matter, intimately articulating and informing matter, and is the grand status behind the symbolism of matter, which is, again, a phenomenological appearance, as in a letter, a spelling, which informs matter and transforms matter absolutely. And this is what is incarnate in the historical aesthetic object absolutely as well, from the human being to the early modern cabinet photograph of Joe McGinnity. But in the moments of transformation, which is to say a species evolution, or a moment in time in cultural history where one method and mode breaks into the other, in this process of chaotic absolution and shape-shifting, the fundamental ontological gravity of the historical object, its very aesthetic principle is being transformed and transmuted in real time, and it's stuck between these stages, this sort of uterine consciousness between the caterpillar and the butterfly, so to speak. This is axiomatically, this is history as an emergent of the absolute. In terms of paradigms, condensations of entire historical movements, which themselves are species epochs or empire epochs or epochs of technology, and then the moment that they condense and distill into this absolute singularity and twist and birth and emerge in a vortex sense, an entirely new form, which itself is springboarding out of, in terms of an increased proficiency of articulation, the previous paradigm as an innovation, a technological innovation. It's always a revolution of language as the foundation. These emergent qualities are, as in techno and techne, which are essentially revealing. By way of the increased apparatus, so you could think of the telescopic arm of Galileo and what that does to the collective consciousness in terms of a real revelation of the true cosmological, psychological status of being itself, because that cosmology, much in the way of Copernicus as well, that cosmology reflects and inverts back upon the grand existential psychological question of human being itself. This is an entire field of revelation which is collapsing in on itself through the true perception of being. And this is unveiling the latent aspects behind and through techne and technology, vis-a-vis the quality of reflection, which again goes back to losslessness and this kind of beautiful paradox and profound paradox of the transformation and translation and transmutation of the body and the image reflection of the body, which is deeply manifest in painting, photography, the mirror. And this is all ultimately self-concept, if you understand this. This is all ultimately grand psychological self-concept, ambling toward revelation of the true status, absolutely. And this is all reflected in the idea of the body, the world, the form, and thus phenomenology through methodology. This is a progressive praxis. This is the grand science of the human experience. Experimentation, revelation. Experimentation, revelation. And this is the technological ambling of the human body in a Darwinian sense. in terms of a biological evolution, but also of human culture. In a McLuhan sense, in terms of the technology and media as reflection. As McLuhan says, right, medium is message. So this is in whole the scientific method of the historical body of consciousness itself proper, and body consciousness into total revelation of being. This is the species lapsing in on itself, folding in on itself. This is the psychological articulation of the wormhole, incarnationally, interrogating into the body between the springs of birth and death to perceive and grasp the absolute, which is always already itself thus an absolution. And that's what I got there. I'll catch you on the next one.